Welcome to Understanding Memory, a Still Strong student workshop. In this workshop, we'll discuss the process of storage and problems of retrieval from long-term memory.
Psychology suggests that we actually have three memories or three stages of memory: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Information must pass through each stage in order to be learned. Information learned is never really lost, but may be difficult to access, sort of that tip-of-the-tongue syndrome.
This diagram illustrates the process of placing information into long-term memory, or how information is lost. We take information in through our five senses. Once that information reaches sensory memory, unless we pay attention to it, that information fades and is forgotten within just a few seconds. To move information into short-term memory, we must pay attention to the material or use a process of rote rehearsal or elaborate rehearsal. That information then enters short-term memory, also known as the working memory or conscious memory. Information in short-term memory is lost after about 30 seconds unless it is actively used. The most efficient way to get information into long-term memory involves a process called elaborative rehearsal. In this process, information is chunked together to combine bits into more meaningful units, or the meaning is associated with other bits or chunks that have already been learned. This active use of the information involves a process of retrieval. Retrieval is finding information in long-term memory and bringing it back to the working memory so that it can be used. Problems retrieving memory can result from not getting it into long-term memory at all, or not finding the information in long-term memory. Again, those methods of transferring information include rote rehearsal, use of auditory repetition, either aloud or silently in one's head, or elaborative rehearsal, using chunking and association of information. Rote rehearsal can be demotivating because it's boring. You lose attention and focus. It can be mildly effective when cramming for an exam unless there's a gap of time that exists between when you study and when you take the exam. Interruptions between rote rehearsal and exams also result in a loss of information if you've not already processed it into long-term memory. For effective recall, information must process into long-term memory in a way that allows you to efficiently retrieve it. Elaborative rehearsal involves actively engaging with information to create deeper meaning and association of items to be remembered. It leads to stronger, longer-lasting memory because memory seems to be structured based on meaning. Reciprocal teaching with a study partner or group is one elaborative technique that is especially effective. Reciprocal teaching involves students preparing and alternately teaching course material to one another. Concept mapping also creates associations between various bits of information. To illustrate the concept of chunking information, let's say that you have 15 seconds to remember these letters: BGI, TAE, LTE, GDO, HTE. Learning these disjointed bits of information would take a process of rote rehearsal to directly memorize the information. Now, wouldn't it be easier to remember this? Big, eat, let, dog, the. Here we have the same bits of information, but chunked in a different order so that they make sense. Now instead of 15 letters, we have 5 sets of 3 letters, but each 3-letter word is a concept. So we have 5 pieces of information, not 15. Now if we reorder the information again, we come to let the big dog eat. Now we have a concept, one singular concept that represents those 15 bits of information. So instead of 15 pieces of disjointed information, or 5 pieces of slightly organized information, we now have one sentence representative of those same pieces of information. Let the big dog eat. When it comes to information retrieval, there are basically two tasks: recall and recognition. Recall involves remembering with only a few cues. A question is asked, and you're required to produce information. This would be similar to short answer, fill in the blank, and essay questions on an exam. The fewer cues a person is given, the more difficult the task of recall. In recognition, a question is asked, and you're required to select from a list of possible options. This would obviously include multiple choice and matching questions on an exam. Recognition is considered to be easier than recall because you're given more cues to find the information in long-term memory. As we heard earlier, psychologists suggest that information can stay in long-term memory indefinitely. Therefore, an inability to recall something learned is not related to forgetting, but a failure to effectively access the information. For example, what did you have for dinner last night? If you remembered, then this information is in long-term memory. See those definitions of sensory memory and short-term memory we talked about earlier. Therefore, you should have also stored in long-term memory what you ate every day of your life. Okay, so now, what did you eat for dinner a week ago? Most of us can't quickly recall that information, even though it's still in long-term memory. The trick to recall is through associating cues. Looking back, maybe using a day planner or a diary, try to recall what you did last week. Where did you go? Who were you with? And what happened that day? Using that data as triggers, you may begin to recall what you had for dinner on a particular night 1 week ago. Now I'm going to use a concept map on that same example, trying to remember what I had to eat 1 week ago, to illustrate the concept of cueing. Now in a concept map, we're going to start with a central idea in the circle. Here you see last Thursday. And from there we have different lines drawn out to concepts or other thoughts. I started with, on last Thursday, looking at my day planner, I worked from 8 until 6:30. I remember that I made an evening appointment, and that meant I needed to make a cell phone call home. Looking at my cell phone, I saw that I did that at 6:45. I remember now that I spoke to my wife, and we argued about me spending too much time at work. During that conversation, my wife told me that she had already eaten and thrown out the rest of the food because it was overcooked. On the way home, I saw that a new Thai food restaurant had opened. Thai's one of my favorite foods, so I went in, I ordered pad Thai to go and Thai iced tea with cream. I also ate that food in my car because my wife says Thai food smells like a wet dog. So now I can recall what I had last Thursday. I used a few cues to start the memory stream. One was to look in my day planner, the other was to look at my cell phone, and then I remembered the associated items that went with those phone calls and appointments until I came to the point that I could remember what I ate and where I ate it. Problems with forgetting are really problems of memory retrieval. These problems are generally associated to one of three things. Number one, the information was never really learned. It never got into long-term memory from short-term memory. 2. Retrieval failure, where cues are either overlooked in getting information or information was not accessed recently or frequently enough to make the recall efficient. Or 3. One piece of information in memory may interfere with or change another. This information interference can be either proactive, older information interferes with newer information, or retroactive, where newer information changes older information. In order for effective memory retrieval to occur, we must make learning active. Here you see the learning pyramid. This image illustrates how passive study strategies, such as listening to lecture or reading and rereading textbooks and notes, often don't engage students enough to make information relevant and memorable. Making information stick requires repetitive exposure from a variety of approaches that make information meaningful and associate it to other information previously learned. In the learning pyramid, you can see where the more passive study techniques at the top of the pyramid will give you 5% to 20% average retention rate. But the more actively involved you are with the information, the higher the retention rate goes. You'll see that by practicing what you're learning, you can raise your retention rate to 75%, or by teaching others and immediately using information learned, you can raise your retention rate to 90%. Let's summarize by reviewing some important points. The capacity and duration of long-term memory appears to be virtually unlimited. Shift your study habits away from passive strategies like reading and listening to more active strategies that connect the information to meaning and associate it to other information you've already learned. The capacity of working memory can be improved by chunking information, which creates meaning, facilitates storage and long-term memory, and improves retrieval. And retrieval of information from long-term memory is usually easiest if we focus on the meaning of the information and look for cues that will lead us on a memory stream to the target information. Thank you for joining me. I invite you to watch additional podcasts for more information on improving your study strategies.